Pawn shop owners, what was the most illegal thing a customer had brought to your shop? Worked at a gun shop and a shady looking guy brought in a few pairs of night vision goggles, like high-end military grade PVS 14 night vision goggles. Ask him why he was selling them. Oh, I just don't need them anymore. Cool man. Do you mind if I call the company real quick and run the numbers? Sometimes this stuff is stolen property. And as soon as I said that, he jumped across the counter, grabbed the goggles and bolted for the door. That Camaro payment at 29.7% APR hits different after a few months. Employee not owner. A guy brought in a stack of like 15 laptops that all said property of City Public School right on the top of each one. He then threatened to shoot me when I told him to get out. Buddy of mine worked at a pawn shop for a few years. They had a guy try to sell them a police walkie-talkie, like straight stolen from a cupboard with the battery taken out. They told him to get fricked and called the cops. I believe they picked the guy up a few hours later. Okay, I'm not a pawn shop owner, but I know a few. One thing I've seen was a guy who brought in smoke grenades and M249 saw belts that he had stolen from our local military drill center. Another was a guy at a local gun store who brought in a pistol that had an illegal oil filter suppressor on it. They told the guy, get the frick out and go destroy that thing. Stealing weaponry from a military drill center. This thread is full of bold brazen criminals, but that takes the cake from me. That's someone with no fear. This just reminded me of my friend who pawned the DSLR camera I let him borrow for a school project. I asked for it back a good amount of times and not once did he tell me what he did. I had to hear it from someone else and then he claimed that I gave it to him. Not an owner but an employee. A man brought in a bag of C and said if I would buy it then resell it back to him in a couple of days. Not an owner, but I got a call from a pawn shop saying that one of my at-home employees tried to sell her work computer. It has my company's logo and contact info right on it, plain as day. How stupid can some people be? A guy literally brought in an RPG. He was doing yard work for this old lady whose husband had passed. She gave it to him for doing some yard work, not realizing it was live and active. The guy was career military, and after the bomb squad came and disabled it, they went to her house and found a trove of similarly very illegal military grade weapons. Not that I'd want anyone to get hurt, but a little old lady in a violent standoff with police would seriously break the tension. Just a worker here, but we had a couple come in to pawn their backhoe over the weekend. Happens a lot. And brought their bill of sale. They wanted a simple $1K loan, which wasn't bad considering how much it was worth. No more than 30 minutes later, cops are there with the owner. Apparently they worked for him and went and pawned all of his industrial equipment. In a similar vein, my friend found some weed in the oven he bought from a used appliance store. The shop called him to ask about the oven. Luckily, he didn't give out his address. How much weed? Literally had a customer come in and say, hi, I've just stolen this phone off my sister. How much will you give me for it? Also had a customer bring in 5 MacBooks at the same time, with a certain logo on it which gave me the impression they were stolen. I told him to leave them with me for testing and called the police. Had another customer bring in a gun and a crossbow. That was weird. I'm in the UK. This is not a normal thing. A crossbow. UK. Obviously, everyone knows the English use longbows. Story from the 90s. My Fender Stratocaster was stolen and I reported it. Couple years passed and an officer called me. Off. Your guitar serial number showed up at a pawn shop. Me. Great. So you know who stole it? Off. The guy who sold it to pawn shop said it was a present from his girlfriend, but she died. Me. Okay. So I get my guitar back. Off. Number. The pawn shop already sold it. Me. Don't they have to check serial numbers? Off. Yeah, but that can take 30 days and we can't expect them to hold on to this stuff forever. Me. What? So what do I do now? Off. Nothing really. Me. So why are you calling me? Off. Just thought you would want to know. Bye. Source. My true story. Most stuff isn't even worth the time to report it stolen. If they buy it and it's stolen, then they have to return it and don't get their money back. If they buy it and sell it in under 30 days, then report it, they profit. I learned this reading some of the comments. You always gotta look out for the people bringing in a crap ton of brand spanking new tools or electronics. Over time you learn to read people based on their appearance, behavior, and personal information. An experienced pawnbroker can almost always immediately sleuth out whether they're stolen or not. In these cases, they usually are. I've never had someone intentionally bring in illicit items, but it's important to check pockets and compartments on cases and similar things. It's not unheard of for some eclectic customer to forget about a little baggie of weed they'd stashed. One guy paid off his loan with cash, and there was a thin layer of white residue coating it. First time I'd seen that one. Not illegal, but toward the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak. Some wisecrack nutcase did try to sell us disinfectant. Funny but also annoying. I had this guitar that had a little sliding door on the side, meant to hold picks. I put weed in there as a joke. Completely forgot about it as I was selling it. They were chill. You could put your weed in there. I didn't work there but was there at the time. A guy brings in a dead duck, which hunting is illegal in my area, and also why just why? Come on, Dwight, we talked about this. No dead animals in the office. So I'm not an owner and I wouldn't call this illegal per se, but I feel like I have to share this. A friend of mine owns a pawn shop, and one day a dude walks in with a cardboard box filled to the top with his own crap. He claims that it's magic and my friend cuts him off right there and kicks him out. As he is walking out, he drops the box on accident, gets all of his crap on the floor, sees the mess he's made, stares at the horrid pile of crap for a couple of seconds, and runs out of the shop. My friend never got his name, and never saw him again. The smell would proceed to linger in the shop for a good month after it was cleaned up. When you wrote crap, I presumed you meant stuff, and it was further into the story that my understanding changed. I would like to go back a few minutes, and not keep reading. Not a pawn shop owner, but was in the pawn shop when this happened. Someone brought in a wheelchair with the tag for the local hospital on the back. Example, property of somewhere hospital. The pawn shop owner told them to leave it and get out. They did, and he called the non-emergency line. The police came and picked it up and took it back to the hospital, or that's what they said they were doing. Friend of mine owns a shop. One day a woman walks in and asks if there was a female employee she could talk to. No problem, it's a family shop and his 18-year-old daughter comes out to help her. She asks to go out to her car, where she opens the trunk. Whole thing is packed with sex toys, bondage crap, outfits, and a big box of dildos. Woman says her sister who recently passed away sold the stuff at parties and she had no idea what to do with it. Not illegal, but hilarious. I used to work at a paw store. A shady guy brought in a tiger skull. I don't remember if it was illegal or not, but the owner was yelling at him. He kept coming back brining animal skin and skulls. I think the police drug busted his house, from what the owner told me. A friend of mine owns a rather unique store, not a pawn shop, but he sells a lot of authentic medieval weaponry, armor, clothing and similar. While I was there, a young couple decided his shop was the place to sell a few old SS daggers, belts, flags and other Nazi memorabilia. Solid logic, except for one thing. We are in Germany. Here the state kind of frowns upon owning or selling this kind of stuff. They could have donated it to any museum and would have had no issue with the law whatsoever. I mean, it was not their fault they found it, right? But they figured that if grandpa was a Nazi, he could at least help with the funds for the renovations and decided cash was better than being named in a museum leaflet. My friend was mostly insulted by the idea that just because he owns a medieval store and sells historic weapons, he must know a Nazi collector that would pay cash, but that was the end of it. He told them to get out and donate it, or if they insist on selling it, to ship it to the US. More money from history buffs, or at least not one happy little German Nazi with a new happy stabby toy. I never thought about how Germany treats stuff like that. That's very interesting. Not a pawn shop owner, but I was on the receiving end of someone selling my stolen stuff at one. We had our house burgled. In UK, me and my dad went to some pawn shops to give them a list of everything taken. Whilst we were in there, someone comes up to counter and starts unloading a bunch of stuff they want to pawn. It was our stuff. We got in a major incident inside the shop. The butthole manager of cash converters was saying it's nothing to do with me. Take it all outside the shop. Sorry buddy, but when you're happy to buy a camera full of someone else's family photos, a laptop, and a bunch of other electronics from 2 junkies who look like they're homeless. No teeth, obvious signs of drug abuse etc. Then it's absolutely 100% your problem to deal with. Police called. Junkies charged with handling stolen goods. I got charged with assault. That was later dropped. Nobody charged with the actual burglary, so no real punishments for anyone involved. We had one of those stores got shut down pretty quick as everything they managed to buy was a stolen item. An MP40, not actually me, but my significant other. He manages a store owned by a national chain. Brought in on porn, and as with all neat things he was just waiting for the loan to drop. After 30 days of non-payment, item goes out for sale. At this point he could purchase it. Now I'm not a huge gun historian, but I know the era and style and had to ask, that gun is super rare if it's not full auto. When a gun is taken in on loan, the gun is run, not the person. So our state's Bureau of Investigation was notified of its existence. Not only is a federal stamp for automatic weapon expensive AF, it's also difficult to obtain, so he was no longer going to purchase it. And it's a good thing because shortly after the gun was seized by ATF, which is when we found out the actual worth. $10 00020 000. Original owner brought it back as a war trophy. Son is the one who got a loan. For like $200, but it was never registered, so it was contraband. It's only worth that much if it's a legally transferable machine gun. Even the shittiest legal machine gun is worth thousands, and the more desirable ones, even with no real historical significance, can sell for $10k plus, just due to the artificial scarcity created by the gun control laws. I don't like pawn shops. My buddy had his surfboard stolen. A few weeks later he found his board in a pawn shop. My buddy approached the staff and said it was his and it had been stolen. The staff then told him he had to buy the board if he wanted it back. The police were called because the board was reported stolen. Upon the arrival of the police, my buddy learned that he still had to buy the board if he wanted it back and then file a claim with the state to get his money back. Why does the state cover pawn shops selling stolen goods? That's bullcrap. He can file a report to get the surfboard back without first buying it. Employee here, not an owner. But I don't know if it's necessarily illegal, but one time a guy brought me a handful of human teeth with bloody roots and gold filings. He wanted me to extract the gold. I said no thanks bro. I run a coin business. I will happily buy gold capped teeth. Gold is gold. Typically come from someone whose family member was a dentist and left them their estate. Really nice old looking farmer man walks in with a shotgun with a barrel with alright too short. Long story short, boss bought it off of him and immediately called the local PD to tell them. Cop asked if you could just remove the barrel and dispose of it as it was too much paperwork and hassle to come down and get it. Local PD are a freaking joke. Or I'll arrest you for possessing it. A TV was stolen from my dad's office and sold to a pawn shop. Pawn America, La Crosse WI. This had been happening with yard decorations and our neighbors told us what pawn shop to look at. Sure enough, it showed up, and at first the manager would not provide any info or even cared that we thought it was stolen. My dad then offered to buy it and requested that the TV be plugged in to check for defects. It worked just fine and my dad said he will take it, but then pulled the remote out his pocket that the thief didn't take and turned the TV off, proving it was his. The manager then had to call and report this. Turns out accepting a TV without a remote is a red flag that he missed in this case. The manager quit, but the general belief was he knew most of the stuff he was selling was stolen, but he fudged paperwork to keep the thief's identity a secret. My dad put him in his place and humiliated him in the most simple way for being a lying frick. Not a pawn shop owner or employee, but a block away from my high school was a pawn shop. It was announced that everyone in the entire school was going to get a Chromebook to do school work. On the first day that we got the Chromebooks, it was rumored that multiple people had brought them to the pawn shop to make a quick buck. I asked one of my teachers who was in charge of all the Chromebook repairs about this later, and he said that only one student had actually done it that he knew of, and he had used the money to buy weed. Dude must have been desperate for a few grams of stems and seeds, because that's about all most Chromebooks are worth. My dad's friend works at a pawn shop in a crappy area and has had some crazy crap come in. Mostly stolen guns and tools, but the story he likes to tell is when a homeless guy tried to sell a sawed-off shotgun covered in tape. They called the cops and the guy tells them he found it in the park. Employee, not an owner. Not really illegal in itself, but probably the most contact with law enforcement I've had. I live in the UK where we have to put the serial numbers of any technology through a police check before paying the customer. We put it in and it flagged as wanted by the police. Within 10 minutes the police were there and asking us to hand the phone over and to talk to the guy. We hadn't even gotten through to them yet on the phone. From what I understand, the guy has bought it online a few months back. Unfortunately for him, the phone was wanted in connection to a murder. The look on that poor guy's face. Not an owner and not illegal, but one of the guys who worked at the place told me that someone brought in a frick box. A decent sized box that has a switch on it that turns on a motor inside that has a connection to a dildo included. That's my sex box, and her name is Sony. My time to shine. My house was broken into years back. They stole very particular items. My mom's laptop, which was hidden under the couch, our great grandmother's jewelry and such. My laptop, Wacom pen, tablet and iPad were all sitting on the kitchen table. The only thing they took was my iPad and the pen to my Wacom tablet. They left my laptop and the Wacom pen tablet. Remember these points for later. The cops couldn't find any good prints to run through the database and no one was immediately found as a suspect. Fast forward a few months. My brother, who manages one of the biggest pawn shops in our city, calls me to tell me that some guy just tried to pawn my iPad. The dude hands the iPad to my brother. Brother turns it on and the home screen is set to a picture of me and my nephew. Brother tells dude that he has to take it to the back and check the serial numbers after getting the guy's driver's license. Brother calls cops and then comes back out to tell guy he has to keep the iPad because it's stolen property. Dude books it out of there, but he wasn't very bright. My brother has all of his personal information. The cops did an investigation and come to find out, this dude is the head of a large drug theft ring. His cronies steal things. They have to give him the stolen goods, then he gives them the drugs. Well, a few more months go by and we find out that our mom's best friend's boyfriend was the guy who had put the hit on our house. He had an oxy problem due to a bad back surgery and a drug dealing doctor. When the doc cut the supply, he turned to other means. It wasn't him that broke in or stole our stuff. However, he knew I used my computer for my job and made sure they left my laptop and stole my mom's. He and his boss, along with multiple other addicts career thieves, were brought down by my iPad. The cops said they had broken into an estimated 300 plus homes and had stolen millions of dollars in property. Former employee, the most illegal thing brought to my shop was an 8-ball Coke. He wasn't selling it but wanted to buy a digital scale and brought it to test the scales we had. Aside from that, a chainsaw. Although not illegal itself, they used it to threaten me, which was pretty illegal. Pawn shops in a big metro get pretty crazy. Not pawn, metal recycler. And the customer was me. Well, sort of me. I was digging up metal from farms and bringing it in for scrap to feed my drag racing habit. My small town had a fairly popular official track that ran bracket races on Sunday. Farmers were happy to get rid of the junk pile and I was young, willing and knew how to use a cutting torch, so win-win. I soon exhausted my supply and started moving further afield looking for material, which is where things kinda went south. So there was this very large military base range nearby, Canada, so security was nearly non-existent in 1980s BFN while there were not operations going on. I learned I could talk my way past the guard station by telling them I worked for the city and was sent to go remove old equipment at one of the gas wells that pocketed the landscape. This gave me access to the range and a lot of fragments of metal. I cannot believe no one questioned the junk I was hauling out in the back of my truck from salvaging various shot up wrecks across the range. Never lifted the tarp even once. Well, one day I came across this odd object. Kinda bullet shaped but really freaking big. Weighed probably 200 pounds. Had this nifty clockwork mechanism in the noise that I could see. Thought the damage it received slamming into the prairie, but thinking it was solid steel, I cranked it onto the back of my truck with my hand cranked crane and drove off. Got to my buddy's place and he really wanted the thing. Paid me way more for it than I would have gotten for it for scrap. It sat in his living room for about a year. We used it as a footstool while we hit our numerous bong sessions. Even discussed maybe turning it into a really big hookah. Eventually I picked up a welding apprentice job by then, so was getting more per hour than ranging for scrap. So buddy has to move and his mom says no way can that piece of junk come to the new house. So he gets me to load it up and bring it to the scrapyard so he can get the scrap value out of this big chunk of iron. I was bummed we didn't do the hooker idea, but WTH. So I unload it and he proceeds to roll it in. Well, apparently one of the guys who works there was wise to what it really was, and suddenly people start coming out of the building and standing around. Then I hear sirens. Well, adding crap up, I decided it was best if I was no longer there, still sitting in the truck, and slowly drove off like I knew nothing. It was on the news that night. Apparently our footstool cum hooker was actually a large caliber high explosive artillery round. They moved it a short distance and detonated it, which left an impressive 15 feet diameter crater. When I think about how close we came to being red mist at any point over that year, I just shake my head in amazement I survived my teen years. Not illegal and not a pawn shop owner, but when my first fiancée and I parted ways I went to go sell my ring. She had given me her ring back, so I went to pawn them because I was broke and I got SOOOO many dirty looks for selling an engagement ring. I think they thought I stole it despite what I told them, but them's the breaks, I suppose. My family knew a pawn shop really well and they'd give us a call when their gold guy came through and we'd take a look at the engagement rings the gold guy had received from the various pawn shops. Got some really nice rings for slightly more than their gold value. Great for us. Great for the pawn shop. Great for the gold guy. Someone tried to sell a rifle in fricking England. He claimed that it was an air pistol, which is allowed if you keep it locked in a box and have a proper gun license. But we could clearly tell that it was a rifle. Idiot got arrested and landed his butt in prison. I'm not an owner, but I once saw someone try to sell a vintage 1940s concealed firearm to the pawn shop. This was illegal as heck and the owner had to turn him down. One of my friends in high school somehow managed to steal several laptops from cash converters. Got away with it too. That was until they tried to sell one of the laptops they stole back to cash converters the very next week, with the CC sticker and barcode still on the bottom. He was quickly caught and they found his whole stash and he did 100 hours community service. Not an owner, but my friend who works at a pawn shop told me this. One day someone came in with a toxic waste container, like a aluminium, real deal nuclear waste container. They had to call Homeland Security. Not a pawn shop, but someone brought in 100 plus stolen brass flour urn to a local scrapyard. The flour urns fit into a grave marker and flip over and fit into a hole in the top of a grave marker when not in use. Some a-hole thought he would get away with stealing as many as he could get in a single load. He brought it to the scrapyard and an employee told him he had to leave the urns because his boss would have to approve the purchase first. The scrapyard calls the police after the guy left and he had left a fake phone number and never came back. I guess he figured the gig was up and bailed. The flour urns typically cost $300 a piece to replace. I think they found the cemetery their heir stolen from and returned. Former gun shop employee here. When I was a new kid, someone tried to pawn a machine gun. Not like, oh, this is a rifle that has select fire capability. This kid brought in a 1919 belt-fed machine gun, the kind they mount inside World War II tanks to shoot at Germans. Felt like out of Street Kings when Keanu opens the trunk and shows the Korean dude's RM2 heavy machine gun. At first I thought it was prank from my new co-workers, a mock-up, or a semi-auto only. Guy was asking for full cash out, no paperwork, red flag. As soon as I pulled the bolt back, it was very apparent this gun is not a normal semi-automatic. Red flag 2. Held the kid at the counter while a colleague dialed the police. Told the dude we could cut him a check or he could wait for my boss to come down and cash him out. Police came and took him away. I'm purposefully eliminating a lot of details because the case happened in a pretty small town. The kid was a gangster wannabe and stole the gun. He thought that the gun shop could be used to fence it because it's collectible and the rednecks there wouldn't let it go to the feds. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.